What's up guys, Lvladen here, and today I'm coming at you with a video on the War Within beta. We are 1 day away from launch, and I'm here to convince you guys why you should play a Ret Paladin in the War Within. Alright, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about is hero talents. Now hero talents are pretty much the main attraction, at least for me, to the War Within. They are these new sub-specializations that each specialization in the game gets. Each spec gets 2. And Reds are Herald of the Sun and Templar. Now, I have played a little bit of every single DPS spec in most of the healers on the War Within beta. And I have to say that I think, at least in PvP, both Herald of the Sun and Templar are as close as it gets. And I know things will probably iron out and there'll be a meta or one might pull ahead of the other. But in my opinion, both are perfectly viable in both 2v2 and 3v3 arena, and I think especially in Battleground Blitz they'll be very, very close. Herald of the Sun has a little bit more targeted sustained damage with Dawn Lights, and Templar has a little bit better on-demand burst, and it still has that sustained with Empyrean Hammers. However, that's not necessarily a targeted ability as it is kind of an RNG random AoE around your character. But if you're fighting classes that don't have a lot of pets, or you're in Mythic Plus, Empyrean Hammers are a very potent form of damage onto your target. Now, I want to drop the 4 builds that I plan on playing in the comments of the, in the description of this video. And one of my favorite things that they've done to the Retribution talent tree is give a little bit more of our melee playstyle back in terms of, wanting to actually be in melee range. Maybe this isn't such a problem in PvE, but in PvP, Red's mobility, it's not as good or consistent as other classes. So in the Retribution rework of Dragonflight, a lot of Red's abilities became range, which I very much like. I love mid-range classes, but I was missing a little bit of the melee aspect. And what Blizzard did to compensate that feel is they brought back, or they buffed rather, Templar Strikes. Now Templar Strikes was an ability that was given to Ret during the Ret rework. However, it kind of fell off because of the, it just didn't hit as hard as some of our other combo point generators. And when we were in PvP combat, we were kind of global locked between our support spells and our ranged spells. Now with the War Within, they buffed Templar Strikes to require less pushes or less button presses in order for it to get out its maximum damage value. So you have 1 charge of the 2-strike combo on Templar Strikes on about a 10-second cooldown, which is lowered by haste. And with this ability, it hits like a truck. It hits pretty much equivalent to a buffed Final Verdict, which some people, maybe you don't like it because you like your Holy Power finishers to feel strong. But in order for a class with lower mobility to feel good in melee range, your melee attacks should be doing a decent amount of damage, and that's exactly what we have here. I also am including in the description below the Crusading Strikes talents. So this is where your auto attacks, your melee auto attacks, become Crusader Strikes, and every other strike grants you Holy Power. These talents received a little bit of buffs from Heart of the Crusader and Zealot's Fervor, increasing their potency and their speed. So it is still a viable playstyle, and for those who don't like a ton of button bloat, which by the way, I really don't feel like Templar Strikes adds button bloat, it just changes your priority in spells. But for those that don't like the Templar Strikes playstyle, it is perfectly viable alternative to playing that active spell. And again, that build is in the description. So let's talk about the Herald Templar Strikes build that you see in front of yourself right here. So this build is what I think is going to be the best, especially when, and I'm sure this is probably going to happen, the bugs get fixed to Burn to Ash and Penitence. So this tree right here has a high damage over time or dot class or specialization niche, I guess. Your Dawn Lights do a significant portion of your damage in PvP. And as you can see right here, I'm not running Radiant Glory, which a lot of people were a fan of on the pre-patch. But I do think it is a viable alternative to take this point out of Divine Wrath and throw it down into Radiant Glory down here. This way, you do have that Wake of Ashes plus Avenging Wrath or Crusade Wings playstyle. In PvP, I do think Crusade is the play because Wings is nerfed by 50% in PvP combat. Something that it's definitely going to be on my wish list to get overturned or maybe slightly unnerfed going into the future, especially with such high health pools. But I do think that either Crusade with Divine Wrath or Crusade with Radiant Glory are going to be perfectly fine playstyles for Herald of the Sun. It actually has super good synergy with the Radiant Glory because every time you Wake of Ash, you get 2 procs of Dawnlight, and you will get a third RNG Dawnlight on a random target around you or yourself. And then every time that you have that active Dawnlight, you're also going to have an active Sun's Avatar, which is an AoE beam that radiates out from you and your Dawnlights. It's pretty cool. I like the animation, and it does pretty solid damage for Retribution. It was recently buffed. And then also another highlight of Herald of the Sun is Blessing of An-Shi. It's slightly nerfed in PvP combat, but it still deals pretty significant damage. It's just a huge steroid and huge RNG steroid to your Hammer of Wrath damage, which is why I am running Vanguard's Momentum as Herald of the Sun here, because this proc can actually proc back to back, and it doesn't, to my knowledge, actually reset the cooldown on Hammer of Wrath like Final Verdict does. So if you maybe pushed if you pushed a Hammer of Wrath and then this procced and you weren't running Vanguard's Momentum, you wouldn't have that second Hammer of Wrath available to chuck the Blessing of An-Shi. So that's why I run the Vanguard's Momentum right here. I'm sure there's a couple other builds that might be viable with the Templar Strikes talent here. So for example, maybe the bugs to these spells don't get fixed, then you can drop out either Burn to Ash for a Inquisitor's Ire, or maybe you throw these points, both these points, into Zealot's Fervor. And then in PvE, if it comes down to it, I think some Paladins have talked about dropping Blades of Light and Divine Arbiter in favor of Burning Crusade and Searing Light for the AoE damage steroids. But in PvP, this is the build that I'm going to recommend for Herald of the Sun when you play Templar Strikes. All right, the next build that I'll go over very quickly is just the Herald of the Sun Crusading Strikes alternative talents right here. Oops, let me show you guys. Nothing changes in the Herald of the Sun tree, but might as well just swap over when I'm talking about it. So the Herald of the Sun Crusading Strikes auto attack talent changes here. Basically, you just change over to CSAA, which is just what I call it. And then you're kind of out of talent points when it comes to trying to pick up another point in Heart of the Crusader. But I think the main draw-in of the buffs to these talents here, both Zealot's Fervor and Heart of the Crusader, is the frequency of Holy Power. So I opted to go with Zealot's Fervor. There's an argument to be made that if you're fighting ranged classes, then you can take 1 point out of Zealot's Fervor and throw it into Heart of the Crusader instead. But for now, it's most likely going to be something like this. And again, if your preferred playstyle is Radiant Glory for a little bit higher consistent damage, but a little bit less overall burst, you can take this point out of Divine Wrath and throw it down into Radiant Glory here. All right, so that's about it for the 2 recommended Herald of the Sun talent specializations here. I'll probably make a video in the next coming weeks about how I feel the talents have changed over time. But for the most part, that's it for Herald. All right, let's talk about Templar now. So my personal favorite hero tree is Templar, and I'm not entirely positive if it is overperforming Herald of the Sun in PvP right now. I have heard that it is the go-to in PvE, but with Templar, the main draw to me is being able to take Templar Strikes and have it be optimal. This talent has very good synergy with Higher Calling. So when you Templar Strike, you have, I think it's about half of a global cooldown shorter on that second Templar Strikes, that Templar Slash, actually. So you are able to chain in 2 extra seconds onto your Higher Calling, rather than, say you're just pushing 2 Blade of Justices and you have to wait the 2 global cooldowns in order to get that off, which I still press anyway. But basically with Templar, the main draw to Templar to me is the on-demand burst damage. And I'm going to have a video in the near future about how to get off that burst damage as optimally as possible. But you have a absolute ton of modifiers for the main drawing spell, which is called Hammer of Light. So after you press Wake of Ashes, you get a 5 Holy Power Spender. And what that Holy Power Spender does, let's go murder some sheep or a spider or something over here. What that hammer does, it has 1, a really cool animation, and 2, it's the hardest hitting spell Rhett has right now. So let's, I feel bad, but Stone Tusk Boar, you're getting dunked on. Oh, never mind. Okay, I don't want to kill the critter. This board is, all right. It looks like this. Okay, we killed it too quickly. Cut. All right, it looks like this. Really cool, dropping the hammers, and it gives us a nice little old Sacred Shield animation, which I really like. It's pretty cool. It's the talent Sacrosanct Crusade. But basically, Templar actually has some, I don't want to say skill behind it, but min-maxing or some optimizations that you can do to Hammer of Light to make it hit super, super hard. So it has many modifiers. For starters, you have the Seal of Order modifier. So you can actually double stack Seal of Order, which is, for the most part, that's something that wasn't necessarily recommended throughout Dragonflight. Like, for example, no need to. You would always just send your final verdicts, and you weren't going to really one-shot someone with a double stacked Seal of Order, or I'm sorry, Blessing of Dawn. That's what it's called, the offensive portion of this spell. But basically, you can stack 2 Blessing of Dawns plus a Judgment, a Greater Judgment here, plus a Final Reckoning, plus your stacks of Crusade and your on-use trinkets, and you can go in for an absolute nuclear Hammer of Light, which is probably the last bursty thing that Rhett has at the moment. And even then, compared to some other specs in the game, it is coming around like, I'd say my upwards absolute max Light's Guidance Hammer of Light crits are probably about 2.2 million. Which, for example, like Death Knights, I've seen 1.8 million Obliterate crits, which Obliterate's not really a big cooldown spell. And I've seen Ferocious Bites from Feral Druids for like 3.3 million. And that's just like the dream scenario. Most of your Light's Guidance Hammer Light procs that you'll have are going to be in PvP at full gear around the 1 million to 1.4 million range. But I really like the fact that you can actually, if you want, control that burst and save up a little bit of your charges of Dusk and Dawn if you're going to net that super one-shotty kill. And it's not like super one-shot, it's just bursty. I like burst. I like having burst. It's one of the reasons that I got into Ret Paladin in the first place, and it feels pretty cool to control that. Some of the downsides of Templar are the secondary effects of Empyrean Hammer. Now, Empyrean Hammer, I do like the fact that there is active gameplay around resetting the cooldown on Hammer of Light. So your capstone talent, Light's Deliverance. What this does is every Empyrean Hammer that you drop, which comes from the buffs Shake the Heavens and from the talent Hammerfall from your Divine Storms and Final Verdicts, this will give you stacks that will reset the cooldown on Hammer of Light. The problem with Empyrean Hammers is that they can be consumed by pets or targets that you don't necessarily have kill pressure or need kill pressure on in PvP. Not so much a problem in PvE. You're trying to kill everything in PvE. But in PvP, when they're being absorbed by Zwen or Army of the Dead or Hunter Pets, it's not as effective as Dawn Lights. But, I mean, at the same time, you're trading off consistent damage over time abilities for on-demand burst abilities. So they do play differently, slightly differently, but it's a good thing. Different is a good thing. I don't want both hero specs to feel the same or play the same way, and I don't think they do. And I really like that about the Retribution hero talents. The next build I'll go over very briefly is the CS auto attack version of this build here. And I don't actually go into Vengeful Wrath. You notice the one major difference between the CS auto attack version of Herald versus Templar is you're pushing Hammer of Wrath a lot less on on Templar, because you are prioritizing your other generator spells. and your final verdicts. The one reason I ran Divine Purpose over this execute spell right here is because the more final verdicts that you get off, the faster you're going to reset your Light's Guidance ability. And I don't know why it keeps changing between my... That's weird. I feel like every time I swap specs, it changes to the other hero talent. I don't know. Very weird. But yeah, that's pretty much why I run this setup here. And you can play Vanguard's Momentum with the CS Auto Attack version of this build here, because Vanguard's Momentum, Hammer of Wraths do contribute to the higher calling, the duration of Shake the Heavens. And CS Auto Attack, it actually does contribute as well, but I think it's nerfed. I think it's like half as effective or a quarter as effective as Templar Strikes. Don't quote me on that, but I know it does kind of work, but it's a little janky behind the scenes of how this extends the duration of the spell. I'm pretty sure it's by half a second, not like a full second like Templar Strikes. But either way, those are the 4 recommended builds, and I do think Ret is going to have a decent spot in the meta once the bugs get fixed, and I do think it is overall very enjoyable to play. If you have been a Dragonflight player and you have kind of missed the self-healing aspect or the off-healing aspect of Ret, that portion is actually back. Ret's Word of Glory and Eternal Flame actually does pretty significant healing now, and they feel worthwhile to press. And then some of our other talents here, the playstyle has shifted a little bit. There's more of a purpose behind pushing Blade of Justice. You know, it's not just to have a filler spell. Now you can actually maintain like a damage increase on the target with Holy Flames. There's a lot of interesting spells and talents that have come up in the second mini rework of Ret in the War Within, and I really enjoy it. And I think it's a great time to get into the expansion, and or rather the game again with a new expansion, and specifically Ret Paladin. And also, even though I rated Ret kind of lower tier in PvP at the moment, I do think it's a pretty good spot to be in going into the expansion. You don't really want to be on the nerf radar in the beginning of an expansion, because sometimes those classes get hit a little bit hard because they'll get overplayed or they're just absolutely busted. And I think especially when Ret gets the bug fix from some of the talents, that it'll shoot up a tier or two. Like we might be like high B, low A tier eventually. But for now, that's about it for me, guys. I will see you next time during the War Within. All right, peace.